had that happen? No. Does he take same-day appointments? Or do you need to schedule a time to meet with him 2 or 3 months ahead of time? Does he speak your language? You been over at the university lately? Or will you need an interpreter to help you communicate with him in a way that both of you can understand? You know that lady on the screen? You met her, okay. Do you think he's seen anybody with your particular problem before, or are you the first one he's ever seen with what you got? Will he be able to take care of you himself, or will he need to refer you to a specialist? Why do you want to talk to him in the first place? Was that your idea, or did somebody suggest that to you? Is that person familiar with God, or just heard he might be able to help? Well, God isn't a doctor or a lawyer or a car mechanic or a plumber or an accountant. He's God. He does not require you to make an appointment, does he? He doesn't have a scheduler who manages his daily calendar in increments of 5, 10, and 15 minutes. He doesn't have a receptionist who asks you to take a seat and says, God will be with you shortly. His door is always open, and there's no one in line ahead of you. There is good news about God. He's different than all of that. Every sermon should have good news, and that's about the best news. God has a unique ability to always have time for you when you're ready to spend time with him. You're special. When he's ready, you're ready. He's ready. He's not like your father who might be watching TV or reading the newspaper and says, let me finish that first and then I'll get right with you. Or he's not like your mother who might be preoccupied with finishing making your supper or texting a friend on her cell phone and doesn't even hear you when you say, Mom, Mom, Mom. He's not even like your first teacher who didn't call on you when you raised your hand in class for the very first time. God is different, right? He's always ready for you when you're ready for him, always. If you've got good news and want to tell him about it, he's ready. And if you get rotten news, he's willing to talk about that also. He'll just listen. If you want to hang out a while, just you and him, he's available. In God's book, he wrote about this special arrangement that he set up just for you. The interesting thing is that he made his appointment with you before you were even born. Psalm 91 is what tells us about this arrangement. This psalm says God calls this place that you can go to meet him anytime, day or night, the secret place of the Most High. This first verse on the screen, I want to read together, like a responsive reading 3 times. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. That's the first verse of Psalm 91. You don't have to get up and get dressed to go there. I was a gynecologist for 34 years. And I noticed that most women who came to see me, by scheduled appointment, I might add, were always dressed in their finest. They had their makeup on, perfume, had their best clothes on, all to come and see a gynecologist whose nurse said, have a seat on the table and put on this paper gown. You don't have to get in your car and drive there if you don't want to. You can, but you don't have to. You can enter this secret place from wherever you are. You just have to leave the part of the world where you currently are and go into the secret place and dwell there with God. He describes it in this psalm as abiding under the shadow of the Almighty. Now, one moment you might be like this lady here in this picture. You might be the lady or you might be the man. You might be holding the hand of a relative or friend who's just been told by his doctor, maybe in an urgent care, something like this. Well, you know that x-ray you did because you've had a cough for 3 weeks to see if you've got pneumonia? Well, you don't. The good news is you don't have pneumonia. But I need to tell you, I see a suspicious spot on your right lung. And that's a quiet moment in the urgent care. We experience that every week at the urgent care. You can go quickly from the shock of that exam room just by taking a deep breath and go into God's secret place. Right there in the exam room. Or if you're the friend, you can excuse yourself and walk down the hall and find a quiet nook and enter the secret place there. After you compose yourself, you can go back to your friend's room and just do the best that you can. Maybe one day the doctor will give you the same report he just gave to the friend. It certainly helps that if you've already spent time in the secret place before you really need to go there. Psalm 91 goes on to say lots of positive things about the secret place where you and God can meet on a regular basis. He's got lots of door prizes for you when you go in there. God calls this place you can meet him my refuge and my fortress. Let's say this together 3 times. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in him will I trust. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in him I will trust. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in him I will trust. That's the second verse of Psalm 91. At any time, the devil can attack us so sharply with problems that seem so severe that the answers do not come to us immediately. Some questions of life don't have immediate answers. We might need to spend time just to process the problem and not come up with any answers until we spend time alone with God in his secret place and we just talk it out. In those times, God will be like a fortress sitting high on a hill. All you need is a little distance from the problem, maybe. Protection from the false thought that the devil likes to put in our minds at these times. Sometimes those evil thoughts are like fiery darts, and even though you know who's firing those thoughts at you, before your head explodes, you can just go into the secret place and spend time with God and let him be our fortress. In 2010, Shirley and I visited Romania for 2 weeks, and we provided medical care in small villages. And the one we stayed in the most was the home of 2 Romanian friends, Peter and Stella, who we met there, and then a nurse arranged for them to come to the United States to get their son treated, and they now live in Sedalia, Missouri, and have been in the United States for 13 years, and they're now citizens. We took off one day with them to go visit a part of Romania, and you won't believe this, it's called Transylvania. That's the Halloween part of this message. There's a central area of Romania, the county, called Transylvania. We did not see any vampires, But they did show us a remarkable town pictured on the screen here called Deva, D-E-V-A. In the center of this town is a high mountain. It's exactly 1,000 feet straight up, rock cliffs over the flat streets of Deva down below. From the top of this mountain, you can see the whole town of Deva and agricultural fields which are spread out below. This town was known as a Roman town and was even present in the time of Jesus. The top of the mountain has a Roman fortress on it. Look there, you can see forever there. You can see all of Transylvania from the top of this mountain. The Roman fortress guarded a trade route called the Salt Road, which took salt from places like the Dead Sea and the Middle East back overland to the Roman capital of Rome itself. In 1269, the town citizen erected a castle fortress on the summit. 1269, that's a long time ago. Most of the castle had high rock walls, and those rock walls and the fortress still stand intact today. Deva is not a large town, but it's actually made famous by a building at the base of the mountain, which is a gymnastics center. Got a slide here of the picture of a cable car that we took up to the top of that mountain because I didn't want to climb up that. And in the left of the picture is a gray building, as many of the buildings in Romania are, because this was a communist country until 1991. And you wonder, what could come good out of a gray building in Romania? This building just happens to be the gymnastics center where a young lady trained from Romania to go to the Olympics. Anybody know this lady? That was her training room. Nadia Comaneci, the first lady ever to score a 10 in the Olympics. And even if you look at her form in this one thing on the parallel bars, you can see why. She just did it right. And there she trained at the bottom of this cable car. We walked along at the top of the mountain once we rode up the cable car along a street that was inside the fortress walls, which protected the royal family anytime they got attacked. And as I walked along those fortress walls, it was gravel. I looked down and I found a little round rock, I thought, but it was an iron ball about the size of those big marbles. Not the little marble, but a big marble, about an inch, and was all rough. And this iron ball turned out to be a cannonball from the cannons that the people in the fortress of Deva would shoot down on the tribes that came up. Now, they didn't have little tiny cannons. This was like shooting out cannon shotgun shells. Instead of one big cannonball, that might have 100 or 500 or 1,000 of these little round balls in there. And you can imagine if you're trying to climb up the mountain walls and here comes 1,000 little cannonballs. And I still have that little round ball. I picture this castle now as my visual image of what God means when he said he will be our refuge and fortress when we need him. We can trust him to help us defeat any kind of enemy that the devil throws at us. When we stood in that high castle, we could see what was going on, see the entire town of Deva, all of Transylvania, the farms around the town, and it's almost like flat town, high fortress up in the sky. It's almost like you're in a place close to heaven, because you were. You were 1,000 feet above the ground below. Just as we were physically close to the sky in that fortress, we can be close to God and safe when we choose to spend time with him in his secret place. Psalm 91 continues with more promises of what God will do for us when we dwell regularly with him in his secret place. Verses 3 through 6. Surely he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the perilous pestilence. Now, we're not saying this together because you cannot say perilous pestilence 3 times. His truth, he shall cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you shall take refuge. His truth shall be your shield and buckler. Buckler is another word for a different kind of shield. You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor of the arrow that flies by the day, nor of the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor of destruction that lays at noonday. Do you know what pestilence is? What? It's a disease, a wide, contagious spread disease. The most common thing we would have, it would be like Ebola virus. You get it in the community and everybody dies. In Europe around this time, it would have been the bubonic plague, around the time of this castle. And then he uses that phrase, shield and buckler. He'll cover us with his feathers. I like the word in there. It says, you shall not be afraid of the terror of the night. I'm still working on that. I'm afraid of the dark. I grew up afraid of the dark and still working on that. He goes further and says, because you have made the Lord, who is my refuge, even the Most High God, your dwelling place, no evil shall befall you, nor shall any plague come near you. For he shall give his angels charge over you to keep you in all your ways. In their hands they will bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. You shall tread upon the lion and the cobra, the young lion and the serpent you shall trample underfoot. Now, Satan is good at throwing some of these things at us. I think the person who wrote this psalm apparently had some of these things physically happen to him. When he says God can deliver us from the snare of the fowler, it sounds like something had happened to him to make him feel like things were going so bad for him. And it might be better if he ended his own life. In our generation, suicide is not a rare occurrence, right? Happens to both elderly and young. We read about it in the papers. A fowler was a professional bird hunter. Here's an artistic description of a fowler's snare, something God will protect us around. You've got a bird here, and then you have a twig, probably a young twig that's very pliable, attached to a string that goes to a square or round noose, and in the center of that is something like bait, and when the bird grabs that bait, he trips the snare, it goes around his neck, and he's caught up. Psalm 91 says God protects us from the snare of the fowler. In January of last year, I had a business associate who in his 40s decided that life was just too hard. He tidied up all of his office, which was usually just a mess of papers and different stacks. He stacked them all neatly, looking like reams of paper, on his desk, on the couch in his office, and even in piles on the floor. And then he wrote a note of his plans to his partner who shared the office with him and was a salesman with him in the same office. He then drove to McBain, called his partner to tell him there was a note for him on his desk. My friend then hung up and immediately hung himself on the McBain Bridge. His partner called 911. A sheriff's deputy was dispatched and found him dead in a modern adult-sized version of a fowler's snare attached to the McBain Bridge. My friend had known about God for many years. He went to one of the large churches in town for probably 15 to 20 years, but he never discovered and internalized a way of escape that on that January 13th morning in 2016, he didn't know that escape that would help him get away from the thoughts of the great destroyer who was pounding him with thoughts in his final days that ending his life would solve his problem. He chose to solve his problems by himself. In verse 13, the psalm writer described two of the forms the devil used to try to take us down, a lion and a serpent, a cobra. Now, both of these animals were created by God, but they are top predators, right? Lions can somehow, you can see a nice picture of a lion laying by a log on the Serengeti, at the edge of the Serengeti animal place over there in Africa. They look nice, don't they? Just laying there, and they've probably been looking like that for 2 or 3 days, getting hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. In their native habitat, however, no one feeds them. They must spend hours stalking their prey, crouching in tall grasses, waiting just for the right time to pounce, right? And then they do. And they can take down animals much bigger than themselves. I've even seen pictures of lions in groups taking down elephants. You know, you probably have too. 1 Peter 5:8 is a New Testament description of this same thing. Be sober and be vigilant, because your adversary, who is the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. From the moment we're born, God creates us for life, and the devil sees us as a target for death. And he's after our soul. However, the good news of Psalm 91 continues, you shall tread upon the lion and the cobra. The young lion and the serpent you shall trample underfoot. That's in verse 13. Now, you go back to Genesis, when Adam and Eve were driven out of the garden, the woman received her punishment, the man received his punishment, and the serpent received his punishment. And God said to the serpent about the woman, her seed shall crush your head. The first prophetic statement of what Jesus will do. The good news gets even better. God will send angels to take charge over us when we need them. I like this part. Angels. Sometimes when just living life and horrible catastrophes happen, and we might be a little weak, don't even have the strength to push open the door to get into the secret place, God is willing to make the forces of heaven help us go through hell on earth. The New Testament said that God even helped Jesus with angels. He sent angels to Jesus when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying alone while his closest disciples were doing what? Sleeping. Jesus is praying and had drops of blood for sweat and prayed, Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Luke 22:42 says that. And the verse around that says that God sent angels down to help Jesus get through this dark moment. When the devil is telling him, you're going to die, and that's your only way out. There is nothing on earth that can defeat you with God on your side. Shirley and I, for years, stole this little prayer printed on the front that we send to people who are having a rough time. Father, help me to remember that nothing's going to happen today that you and me can't handle together. Let's try that one together. Father, help me to remember that nothing's going to happen today that you and me can't handle together. In the 1940s, a young couple met at Wheaton College in the suburbs of Chicago. Can you imagine a boy and girl meeting at college and falling in love? Has that ever happened? Wheaton is a Christian college, and they both went there independently to study and discover what God wanted them to do with their lives, and to get training to help make that happen. They fell in love and got married. Now, they went to high school between 1941 and 1945. Any of you remember those years? They entered college. They fell in love, got married, and graduated in 1949. They both felt that God called them independently to take the good news of the gospel to an unreached Stone Age people in the jungle of the South American country, Ecuador. They actually met 4 other couples who were united by a similar vision, 10 different people. They all moved to Ecuador. After college, they had spent between 49 and 52, they had spent 3 or 4 years studying linguistics. Because when you go meet a Stone Age people in the jungle, you got to learn their language. And if nothing's written down, you got to learn how to talk to them. They had to use their linguistic training to do this. These Indians had very little previous contact with any civilized people, and what had been was bad news. Jim Elliott and his 4 buddies developed a way to fly an airplane, a Piper airplane, around in a circle, around and around. Say they saw this as a nice opening here. They would fly around in a circle, and then they'd drop a rope down from their airplane, and as they flew around in the circle, it would down at the bottom of the rope, it would just be like it was going straight down. At the lower end of that rope, they placed a basket, and inside they put useful things that the Auca Indians might like. A cooking pot, a machete to chop things away in the jungle, things like that. Maybe something to eat, because all the Indians ate were roots. They found the Aucas and would fly around. Eventually, they thought the time had come. They decided to actually land their plane on a sandbar in a jungle river, which was a tributary of the Amazon River. The Amazon comes out on the Atlantic side, the east side of South America, but along the west side are the Andes Mountains, and then as you go down those mountains, you go down to the flat jungle lands. And they found a river with a sandbar, and they landed their plane. They thought it would work. They called out after they landed in the Auca's own language and the few phrases that they knew. "Hello, we are friends. We have presents for you." When finally, after 2 days, 3 Auca Indians walked out of the jungle, stark naked. There were 2 men, 1 woman, and 2 men. The years of tedious training in college on the mission compound had paid off. And then, after a couple hours, we did hand language and stuff, talked a little bit. The Indians walked back into the jungle. A few days later, the 5 men used their airplane radios after they had landed to let their wives know on a Sunday afternoon, January 8th, 1956, that on the way to land their plane, they had seen 10 Auca Indians in a row coming from their village toward the sandbar. And they said they were going to have contact with these people finally and get to talk to them and begin their missionary activities. That was around noon. Sometime before 4:30, the Indians returned from the jungle to the sandbar and killed all 5 men. When they didn't call, the wives became frantic. They sent other planes out. When the story hit the media, it was devastating to their families and back home. The seemingly sensible thing to have happened next would have been for the 5 widows to return to the United States with their children and do the best they could as 5 young Christian widows. But what makes sense to the world is sometimes nonsense to people who have spent time with God in his secret place. Jim Elliot's wife, whose name is Elizabeth, was a talented writer. Even though she had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, she had a decade of journaling, both of her husband's, Jim's, writings and her own writings of their romance, their time in college, their missionary training, and then the 4 years that they had already spent in Ecuador. And she found out that there was one resounding theme, which I know many of you have heard about, and Jim Elliot came up with this: he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Let's try that together. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Okay, so that was in 1956. He would have graduated from high school in 45. He would have been 18 plus about 11. So he's in his late 20s, maybe 28, 29, something like that. And throughout his life, he came up with this theme. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Elizabeth Elliot did not choose to be depressed, despondent, and live life as a helpless victim. She carried on her and her husband's life work and carried the gospel to the people who killed her husband. She stayed in Ecuador. She continued working to make contact with and learn the language even better and better. She even moved into their villages with her daughter, who was young. She met and became friends with and evangelized some of the 10 men who had killed her husband Jim and his 5 companions on that sandbar. She chose not to hate them, but to love them, because God first loved her and Jim. She wrote a book, which I first read in 1964, and it remains the most influential book on me outside the Bible that I've ever read. It's called, any of you know what it's called? What?
Point in the Spear.
Yeah, that's the movie, I think. The book is called Shadow of the Almighty, taken from the first verse of Psalm 91. You can get it on Amazon today, new for $8.54, or used for $2 or $3. Elizabeth Elliot could have said, I have had enough. I do not understand this, God. I give up. You promised to take care of us, and now Jim is dead. Instead, I'm sure every day since, she has found time to counter those kind of thoughts that the devil puts in her head by finding and spending time in her secret place, turning the knob, going in and spending time there. Jim has been in the presence of God since 1956. She's been in there too, in her secret place, under the shadow of the Almighty. I have good news for you today. God invites you to meet him in the secret place. When you're ready, he's ready. Because whoever finds God, that's discovered.